What is God doing here? Moses, you need to talk to God. Protest this unjust manifestation of his wrath. And Moses apparently tries to calm Aaron down. Moses doesn't have to go to the mountain and inquire of God as to why such a thing would take place. He says to Aaron, Aaron, this is what the Lord said. Don't you remember? When he established the priesthood and gave the priests their very purpose for being, he said, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy. And before all of the people, I must be glorified. Now, in this succinct response that Moses gives to Aaron, I think we find the leitmotif of the whole book of Leviticus, and indeed the cardinal crystallization of the essence of worship for all of God's people for all time. From the first offering that was given by Abel in the earliest days of Genesis, to the worship that is offered in heaven by the angels as it's recorded in the book of Revelation. God, at the center of worship, is to be regarded as holy. And the focal point of all worship and of all religious life is the glory of God. That's why we saw with the tabernacle that only the priest could enter into the holy place. And the Levites were stationed all around the tabernacle to ensure that all of the activity that surrounded the worship of the people of God manifested His holiness and declared His glory. So I believe that's the key to understanding the book of Leviticus and the entire Old Testament priesthood. What these rituals that governed the laws that are set forth in Leviticus are about are the removal of defilement, or the removal of the profane from that which is sacred. And this is the task of the priesthood, to keep before the people their holy vocation, their call to mirror and to reflect the character of God in all of their covenant life. And so we have these seemingly endless lists of rituals of purification and of cleansing, coming right down to the decision as to what foods could be eaten by the people of Israel. We look at the dietary laws of Israel, and certain animals are allowed to be consumed for food, and certain others are forbidden. Likewise, certain forms of produce that is grown by the farmers of the day was permissible to consume, while others was not. Now, an awful lot of people look at those dietary laws in the Old Testament and assume that the only concern that God has in this legislation of diet is medicinal or therapeutic. Because even from today's standpoint, we look back and we see that certain foods that were prohibited from the Israel's table are foods that even in our day are capable of carrying disease. We still are very careful. Well, we don't eat, as a rule, scavengers who feast upon dead carcasses and can easily become hosts for parasites and for the transfer of serious diseases. And certainly there was a therapeutic dimension. The prohibition against the eating of pork, for example, in the Old Testament was probably related to how easily pork can become contaminated with trichinosis and that sort of thing. But if we look a little bit more deeply at the Old Testament regulations with respect to diet and with respect to food, we see that it's not only therapeutic or medicinal. Because some of the very foods that are forbidden to Israel in the Old Testament later on get their okay in the New Covenant situation, where it was still an ancient culture where they didn't have the sanitary measures available to them that we have in our culture today. But more importantly, the distinction was made between that which was clean and that which was unclean. And that's the fundamental distinction, not simply clean with respect to medicinal cleanliness, but clean with respect to the types of animals that were involved. For example, Israelites were restricted in their food diet to eating only domesticated animals, not wild animals. And the grains and the food substances of their produce that were part of the allowed diet indicated, for the most part, those foods that were a direct result of the crop raising of the people. And so the people were, in a sense, allowed to eat of the fruit of their labor. But we're to be careful about eating things that were strange and foreign and outside the camp. I mean, even down to these seemingly innocuous points of dietary consideration, there is this desire to avoid the defilement of sin. They are symbolic in their dimension here to say that God has so ordered this nation, called it to be separate and consecrated, different from all other nations, because God Himself is holy. God Himself is other. God Himself is different from us. And the fundamental difference between God and His people is the difference between the one who is absolutely pure and holy and His creatures who have become sinners. Now, all the world has been plunged into sin. But God, in His purposes of redemption, to redeem His people from sin, creates a nation and say, I'm going to make you different. I'm going to make you a representative of me. You shall be holy even as I am holy. And down to the last detail, I'm going to legislate a nonconformist view so that people will look at you and see that you are different. And this became a matter of great moral commitment to the godly people of Israel, so that when they were carried away in captivity and they were commanded to eat of the food of the foreign nations, they refused to do it because they didn't want to violate these laws and become defiled in the sense or in the presence of God. And so the theme of the holiness of God and the sinfulness of man recurs throughout the book of Leviticus. Now, the priests, in addition to being responsible for all of these ritual laws, were also responsible to some degree for being civil administrators. They held the role that later would be given to the judges, and they were the physicians of the day. I mentioned that lengthy section in the Old Testament there where people have to go through this detailed list of examination for the purpose of diagnosis to see whether it's a harmless skin rash or to see whether it's leprosy. And it was the priests who were responsible to make the final diagnosis in cases like that. You recall in the New Testament when Jesus healed the lepers. When He was finished healing the lepers, He said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." That's like saying, now go to your doctor and have the doctor confirm that you are indeed healed from this dreadful disease. One of the important aspects of the priesthood in the Old Testament is the care with which God designates and designs their garments. That we find earlier in the book of Exodus, in Exodus 28. Exodus 28 begins with these words. God is speaking, and he says, "Now take Aaron your brother, and his sons with him from among the children of Israel, that he may minister to me as priest, Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. And you shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and for beauty." And then what follows is an elaborate, detailed description of the design of the ephod, the breastplate, and the turban, and the names that are inscribed across the gowns of the priest, that they are to be holy unto the Lord. But we wonder, why this detail in the dress and the garments of the priest? And God gives the answer. He said, I want these priests to be different. I want them set apart, and the clothes that they are to wear are to be for glory and for beauty. This is often overlooked, that in the design of the tabernacle, in the design of the priesthood, the glory of God is at the center of concern. And the link that is found here between divine glory and beauty. We often miss that beauty itself calls attention to the nature and the character of God. That's why, in summary, we can say that these instructions for worship in the Pentateuch are to worship God in the beauty of holiness.